Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Stella. In today's video, I wanted to discuss my experience of flying from Frankfurt, Germany to London in the UK on the day before the UK imposed the 14-day quarantine rule. Before anybody comes for me, my travel was essential. I didn't have a choice. Sadly, COVID did not stop the lease on my flat expiring, and I haven't yet. I have to move flats, which is something I'm doing this week. So as a result, I had to come back to the UK, and I just wanted to share my experience of flying in the current state of things. The first thing I wanted to share is how I prepared for my travels. So I researched on both the Frankfurt Airport, Heathrow Airport, and the actual airlines' websites to see what all of their regulations were and what I should be expecting when I'm flying. For example, in Germany, you are required to wear a face mask at all times in a public space. So for example, as soon as you arrived at the airport, and if you're arriving by public transport at the airport even before, as well as on the planes, you have to wear a mask or some form of mouth and nose covering. I couldn't take it off theoretically until I arrived in Heathrow. However, when I got off the plane, it was a personal choice. I decided to keep it on. On the Heathrow website, and they do tell you that when you arrive there could be thermal screening and some other things, but nothing major. And on the Lufthansa website was, for me, sort of the most important things as to how I would be flying. So again, you had to wear a mouth and nose covering, and the interesting thing was you were only allowed to take one piece of luggage with you on board. So this meant that even though you're kind of allowed to take usually you can take a suitcase and maybe a handbag on board, they weren't allowing this, or they aren't allowing this at this time. You are only allowed to take one piece of hand luggage on board. So I hadn't been sure what this meant, whether they would be taking it off you when you got to the gate, or whether they would be taking it off you before security, essentially checking in the bag as normal, as if you were just checking in a bag. And I kind of assumed that the regulation is in place to prevent a build-up happening at security, so that if you have only one piece of luggage, there is a sort of a higher turnover at security and people not queuing too close and things. So I was actually able to check my bag in before security, but I was really surprised that when I got to the gate there was still a lot of people with two bags, and then I was kind of like, I don't know, confused, because I didn't really understand what it was helping then. They did take them off people then when you got to the aircraft. They were really strict about it. No matter what size of handbag you had with you, they would say you're only allowed one, so you either had to put the handbag into your suitcase or give one up. The next thing I wanted to share is what was in my handbag while traveling. So for me, one of the most important things was face masks, like I already mentioned. I still have my bag here, like kind of semi-packed. I haven't really taken much out of it. So actually I have a little airtight bag. It's open right now because I'm at home, of just full of masks. I do have also reusable masks, which is what I was wearing on the flight and in the airport, just to be more mindful of the environment and things. But I do have a whole bag of substitute masks just in case. The other thing I brought along with me was disinfectant towels. Towels, is that what they're called? Disinfectant wipes, just in case I wanted to wipe down any of the areas around me, which I personally did, especially when I got onto the aircraft. And following kind of in line with the disinfectant things, I also have been traveling with disinfectant spray, as well as different hand gels. And then the last thing that I think is kind of noteworthy in this pack that I decided to take with me is some strepsils. I was a little bit scared that sometimes, you know, when the air is dry, you feel the need to cough. And I know that that doesn't mean you have coronavirus, but I just feel like at this time there will probably be quite a lot of people judging you, even if you do need to cough just once. Okay, now that I've talked about my preparation, I want to talk about the actual experience of flying. Personally, I chose to fly on the first flight out of Frankfurt to London. Currently there's only one airline flying, which is Lufthansa. They have 2 flights a day, so there was one at 8 a.m. and I think one at 2 p.m. I decided to fly at 8 a.m. just because I assumed that the airport would be kind of empty and also when I arrived on the London side on a Sunday morning, I felt like the tubes would be less packed. When I got to the airport, it was really quiet, and I think these are like scenes that quite a lot of people have shared. Something that really surprised me was that Lufthansa kind of encouraged you to use the bag drop-offs, so it's a bit like self-checkout just for luggage at the airport if you were checking in luggage. But if you were then checking in one of your hand pieces of luggage, you had to go up to a counter. So actually I checked in my first bag through the drop-off, and then I had to go up to a counter, which I kind of felt like defeated the purpose, because I was like, I've just gone to use the self drop-off to prevent being in contact with anybody, to then be told I have to be in contact with someone to check in the bag that I was taking on as hand luggage. Something to note is that I wasn't really sure whether my parents would be allowed to come into the airport with me or whether they would only be letting travelers into the airport. In our case, they did let my parents into the airport with me. I don't know whether this varies from airport to airport, but in Frankfurt it was fine and it was allowed, and they could walk right up to security with me. So when I got to security was pretty normal. I think everything was kind of as usual. When I got to security, I think there was maybe like 3 people in front of me waiting, and basically it was only ever one person that was allowed to go to the security bit, you know, where you take out all the stuff out of your bag and then you put it onto the trays and everything, and everybody else had to like queue in the line. But there was only like 3 people in front of me, so yeah, the 2-meter distances were kept and everything. Once I was through security, I also had to get my passport checked, and this was also same as usual. There was nobody in front of me, but there was markings on the floor like to indicate if there was a queue to get your passport checked, that you had to keep like the 2-meter distance. Once I got through the passport check, then you're kind of in the main part of the airport. Actually, yeah, I was quite surprised the shops weren't open. I had an inkling that that might be the case, and on all of the duty-free it just said like temporarily closed. Then the other thing is that I think these are images that have been all across the internet and the news and things. It was the same at Frankfurt Airport, that they were like crossing out parts of the chairs, and you know, that you couldn't sit right next to each other, and on all of like the tables they had like stickers saying please remember to keep like 2 meters of space from each other, and all of these kinds of things. Then also when we were queuing to kind of get on the plane, there was no social distancing. I mean, they kind of ran it the same way as usual, that first the different classes get called up. Anyway, yeah, I got onto the flight and I hadn't been expecting that somebody would sit in the middle, and to be honest, like, this person sat down in the middle and I kind of turned to them and was like, you know that there has to be a seat free between everyone? And he said, no, this is my seat. And then I looked around the plane and realized that there were other people also sitting in the middle seats. So it's just something to be conscious of if it does bother you, that there is a chance that the planes can do that. I think as much as possible they're trying not to, but airlines are allowed to do that, and I assume in this case Lufthansa has seen the opportunity to make that flight worth their money, because so many people wanted to return to London or to the UK in general, because I don't think you could really fly anywhere else in the UK other than London on that day. You know that most airlines are running with kind of a reduced service, so on the Lufthansa flight all you got was water. They just handed you a bottle that was like pre-packed and everything. All the staff were wearing masks, they had gloves on, everything was really sanitized and clean. And yeah, the flight in general was really good. I'm really lucky. I had a really nice day. I had some really great views, and I actually flew right over my office, which was a bit weird because I haven't actually been in London for 4.5 months, like, never mind just the time I've spent in quarantine in Germany, or like in lockdown in Germany. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was what it was like when I arrived in the UK. So obviously I was arriving the day before they were going to start monitoring people for the 14-day quarantine, so I kind of assumed that they would maybe already have a few of the processes set up, just so that when it comes into effect the next day that they would be like ready. I was really shocked that when I got off the plane there was nothing. I arrived at Terminal 2 at the same time as a flight from Toronto and New York and somewhere else, I'm not sure. And everybody was just like normal, just like normal. You go through, you go to the gates where you get your passports checked, everything. There was nothing different. And I mean, like I said, I'd checked the website, I'd expected like to be there to be thermal screening, but there was no sight of anything like that. You kind of just got led down to wherever your passport was, and you needed to get it checked. And even then, in those queues, when you were queuing to get your passport checked, because like I said, there was so many people because there was several flights that come in at the same time, there was no social distancing. Everybody was like right on top of each other, like waiting to get into the gates and to get their passport scanned and everything. So I was just trying to get through it as quickly as possible so that once I was gone, like I could kind of stand away from people. I also think it's a little bit irresponsible to be having people arriving from like Europe and I don't know, abroad in the same space, but then you're like throwing a fit over having like the next day starting this 14-day quarantine stuff. If I'd been the UK, I definitely would have tried to isolate people coming from countries where there's a much higher cases of COVID, for example the US and New York, whereas in Germany and Canada there's very low cases and numbers, or in Germany it's a very controlled situation. But yeah, I really do wonder at what point they were going to ask for people's addresses. So yeah, so that was my experience of traveling from Frankfurt to London the day before the UK implemented the quarantine rule. In general, I think they handled it really well, but I don't really know how airports would cope if we went back to our flying habits before COVID. Just because, you know, if there was a huge build-up at security, like you wouldn't be able to maintain the 2-meter distancing. You know, you'd have a queue running outside of the airport, you know, entrance. So yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to see how that develops. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. And if you have any of your own stories to share from traveling recently, please comment down below. Like, I'd be really interested to hear. I do really enjoy traveling, so I'm kind of curious to hear how it is currently for anybody else, and especially people who are coming into the UK since the 8th of June. Like, I think that's really interesting, whether they've changed anything at the airport or if your experience was the same as mine. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.